Greetings, fellow humans. I'm MartianBuu, and today I have for you the AMA I promised earlier this week. These are questions asked of me from YouTube comments. I actually recorded this once already today, and it was so long that the thought of editing it all down filled me with dread, so I'm doing it again, but I've trimmed off many of the redundant questions. So if I didn't answer you specifically, I'm sorry, but if you guys like this sort of video, we can do it again another time. You can have another chance to have your exact question answered. First up, we have Colin, who asks, I would like to hear your thoughts on balancing for power level versus play pattern. I find the reasoning for the latter to be quite shaky at times, and more often than not, people dislike losing to what are generally considered play pattern problem decks, when in reality it's certain power outliers in an otherwise fine deck. I do think that a lot of players have unrealistic expectations of balance, but I do think that play pattern is more important than power level when it comes to wild, which isn't to say that power level isn't important, but no matter how much you nerf, with this many cards, there is always going to be something that is more powerful than everything else. It's you can't get around it. Some metas feel like they're more balanced than others, but making it so that all 11 classes feel as decent as all of the others is just too big an ask when so many of the powerful cards of each class can only be used within the class, right? Just the way that Hearthstone is set up, even in standard, it's really hard to make sure that all 11 classes feel like they have something. And in wild, it's just not happening. Which isn't to say that when something becomes so powerful that it eclipses everything else, like with the Demon Seed, the dark layer version of that, for example, that shouldn't be toned down. But something's always going to feel way stronger than everything else. And in general, a wild play pattern problem to me is something that can only be interacted with by going into your opponent's hand early. I don't mind full from hand OTKs when like the earliest high roll is like turn 6. A great example of one that I thought was pretty decent was Ash's Mechathune Warlock, because they had like a turn 7 high roll and a turn 8 consistency. That's enough time to find a dirty rat and try to do something about it. It's when like turn 6 consistency, turn 4 high roll, like with Pillager Rogue, that's like fast enough that aggro doesn't really have a reliable chance of killing before the ice block / evasion. And it's not enough time to find like dirty rats by the time that you can play it and remove it in the same turn before they get it back with Potion of Illusion or Shadow Step, you know? So like a game of Hearthstone just has to have been played before the combo comes down, I think, for the most part. There is no hard and fast rule, and kind of to your point, you basically have to play it by ear. But I would say when a deck forces you to choose between a meaningful answer and not ruining your deck when you face literally anything else, that's when we start to have a play pattern problem. Jamie asks, do you foresee pure control, running the opponent out of cards to fatigue, will ever be viable in standard or wild? Do you think it's something Blizzard have consciously moved away from? I know a lot of people, including me, enjoy that playstyle, but also understand they would want to promote quicker and more games from a business point of view. I would say it's unlikely that we see a lot of that moving forward. When Ixar was a big part of Hearthstone, he was saying that he was actively trying to make sure that games don't go that long. Someone else, I think it was Cora, was saying that their plans for control for the next year were to give control players the feel of that, but still have a decisive win con, something like that. So yeah, they're trying to make sure that that doesn't happen, but they want you to have a good experience, and they're trying to like, you know, come up with a compromise for that. I don't know what that's going to look like, but I would say you can expect that type of thing to pop up from time to time, but you can expect them to also work to prevent that from happening. The best you can hope for is something I think like Cthulhu Druid, where it is attrition, but it does have a decisive win con. Will asks, what's your favorite and least favorite standard from your time playing MTG? So my favorite was Return to Ravnica Theros standard. That was my favorite. I like all kinds of archetypes and play styles, and they had aggro that I really loved. Like I liked the red deck wins with splashing white for Boros Charm and sideboard. I liked blue white / Esper Control from back then. That was really fun for me. Even decks that I mostly don't like mono blue aggro, that was really cool. Like Devotion to Blue back then was pretty fun. It wasn't just like every cheap counterspell plus one scaling threat with flying, which is a deck I kind of hate. So yeah, there was a lot to play, both in single color and multicolor decks. I played most of the stuff from back then. I really enjoyed it. My least favorite was probably War of the Spark, even though there's a lot of War of the Spark decks that I really liked. That meta actually killed Magic for me. I stopped playing Magic regularly because of Wilderness Reclamation Nexus of Fate deck. If you guys think that Quest Mage with infinite turns was bad, this was that on steroids. It was crazy. It was reliably going off on turn 5, and instead of waiting like 2 to 3 minutes to see if your opponent might whiff on the parrot, and they might whiff on the parrot, it was waiting like legitimately 15 minutes to watching your opponent play a bunch of turns, hoping they'll whiff when they probably won't. I don't know. It's hard for me to, like, without going in the ins and the outs of that deck. It was the same thing as Infinite Turns Quest Mage, but faster, more reliable, and took way longer to see if your opponent would whiff. It was awful experience, and they banned the Teferi and the Wilderness Reclamation eventually, but it took them too long. Like, I'd already dealt with it for too long and lost my enthusiasm. So definitely my least favorite. Gus asks, what's your favorite dinosaur? Tyrannosaurus Rex. Snowchugger asks, my question is, what is your favorite voice line from Hearthstone that when you hear it, you always crack up? Mine is pretty self-explanatory. So Snowchugger probably likes Chugga Chugga. For me, that was Goldshire Knoll. More bones to gnaw on. That one actually legitimately made me laugh for the first few weeks that it was out. Every time I would hear it, it was so funny. Stefan asks, how can you prove you're an actual Martian? I'm not an actual Martian. I'm a human, just like the rest of you. Mighty Sandwich says, very important question. Favorite type of potato and favorite way to eat? Mashed, fried, boiled, etc. And explain why. I probably have to give it to fries, so I can be a little boring sometimes with my preferences, but you know, some things are popular for a good reason. Fries are easy to eat, delicious, salty, and you can dip them in various things and taste really good. So versatile, tasty food, I would say. What might be the actual winner is scalloped potatoes. So we have those sometimes for Thanksgiving. They're like thinly sliced potatoes, and then you bake them with a bunch of cheese. So what's not to love? Tejas asks, any tips for someone trying to start a channel? Are you trying to start a YouTube channel or a Twitch channel? I will say for me, I didn't have any connections with people moving into when I started streaming. So for me, the key to success was resiliency and frequency. So I didn't let the fact that my first week of streaming, I was streaming to 0 viewers, get me down. It was right after the pandemic started. I streamed for a week to basically nobody. A couple days would go by and I wouldn't have anyone in my chat. And you have to pretend that there are people in your chat. So I was doing this for 6 days a week, 8 hours a day. And the whole time you got to pretend there are people in your chat. You can't just wait for someone to show up and say something until you start talking. You have to pretend you have 100 people in your chat, narrate all of your plays, talk about something funny that happened to you, anything, you know, be talking so that when somebody does tune in, they're tuning into content and not somebody looking all bored playing a game in silence. It can be hard to not despair at the fact that you're streaming to nobody, but you got to pretend and you got to stick with it. So be around to be found would be if you're going to do it like me, the hard way where you start from nothing. It helps to have connections outside of that. So if you're in Discords or on Twitter and you have made connections with people so that you can say, hey, I'm going to start trying to stream, you'll get your buddies, a handful of them, coming in just to hang out with you and watch you play the game. I've seen that with a bunch of people who stream Wild. Their friends will say hey, why don't you stream? They'll be all right, fine. And then they immediately start streaming to 15 people. And then if they like it, they can keep going and push for partner. That's happened a few times. So yeah, if you can make some friendships first, it's going to take off that first few weeks of streaming to nobody and make you not have to deal with that. There are exceptions, but cam on, mic on, whole time. As for YouTube, I had already made connections prior to YouTube. So I already had an established partnered Twitch channel before I started my YouTube. So I was able to say, hey, I started my YouTube, and then a bunch of people who watch my Twitch went and watched my YouTube right away. So I didn't have to worry about releasing a video to no viewers. But it idled for a long time at a couple hundred, and it started to pick up because, again, I was reliable. So when I'm posting videos regularly, they're more likely to pick up speed, but also a lot of my early stuff was pretty low quality because I was inexperienced. So I got better at editing. I got better at setting up my Twitch streams to be more editable. I got better at thumbnails and I got better at titles. So even now, I'm always asking advice from peers. So I'll post things in Discord with people who are like-minded and who already have established and more successful YouTubes than me, and just asking peers of all levels, like, what do you think of this? So I'll, like, when I try out a new thumbnail, I'll post it in the Discord and ask for feedback. And that feedback goes a long way. Even just your family can help a lot. So like, you get in your own head about the way a thumbnail should look, and then I'll call over my wife to come check it out, and she'll point out something really obvious that I don't see because my head was in it. So whether it's Twitch or YouTube that you're trying to start, you need regularity, you need to not despair, you need to have a mic and a cam, and seek constant feedback. Shaquille asks, bit of a random question, what single card from one class do you think would make another class way too strong? I've always thought that Prep and Druid would be crazy. I think Prep and Druid would be really good. I don't know that it would be crazy. It's kind of already got tools like that. And Druid has had that, but better, right? Like they've had Innervate. So we kind of know how that would play out. One of the ones historically that I thought would be nuts is Mysterious Challenger in Mage. Like, can you imagine? I think that would be less powerful nowadays, but still probably be pretty worth it. Sort of the Fallen in Mage, probably pretty insane. And then if you take Radiant Elemental and put it in like Rogue, for example, it's probably pretty nuts. There's also a lot more niche things like Koldara Drake in Priest. Can you imagine Raza Priest with Koldara Drake as instead of Spawn of Shadows? So like off the top of my head, that's about what I'd be thinking. I'm sure there's like all kinds of other absurd things that you could do. Hearthstone and Jerry says, after the recent nerfs, what combos or decks do you think will need to be hit in order to make your perfect wild format? I don't know that my perfect wild format is achievable. So like my perfect wild format would be like all 11 classes have decks and multiple play styles to play, and that's just not happening. There are too many classes and not enough crossover with class cards. If way more cards were dual class and tri-class, then maybe we'd have a chance of that. But there's always going to be a couple that feel stronger than the others and a couple that are basically unplayable, the way that everything's set up. So as far as balance, what I want for Wild is the least amount of changes to do the most good. What do I think are the least amount of changes to do the most good? Would be looking at Flurgle Toxfin, Floop's Gloop, Big Priest. I think that Flurgle Toxfin and the Druid anti-aggro tools are so strong that the only type of aggro that can succeed is the absurd aggro like Even Shaman and Pirate Rogue. If popular classes didn't have absurd wombo combos like that allow you to completely come back from any board against aggro, then some more mid-rangey aggro decks like Even Death Knight could show up that feed on decks like Even Shaman and Pirate Rogue, which would make aggro more balanced for more classes to be able to deal with. Along those same lines, I really wish that more classes like Warrior and Paladin would have the strong but fair control tools like Warlock and Priest do, such as like Soul Rend, Defile, Mass Hysteria. Like right now, I feel like too few classes have the powerful aggro and too few classes have the powerful control. And I'd really like the power to be spread out. I think that means nerfing the powerful wombo combos in Shaman and Druid and buffing some control tools in classes like Warrior and Paladin. The Connor asks, do you think a Renathal reversal would help stabilize the format against pure aggro? And if so, do you think combo decks will rise as well to counter the control/Reno decks? I would refer to the last question as part of this, but I also feel like Renathal was a band-aid / eye-opener more than a real good solution. Even now, I can't decide whether I liked the card being part of the format or not. There was a lot of good, but there was a lot of staleness that came with Renathal, and I don't like hearing at the beginning of every single Hearthstone game, you know? It did feel quite samey, and I would much rather each class have their own unique thing that they bring to the table rather than every class relying on a single neutral card that laughs at me at the beginning of the game to be viable. And I think we've seen already that just a little bit of attention to balance can have a similar result than just having Renathal. Like, people have been experimenting so much more this week than they did when we got a new expansion. When we got Naxxramas, everyone was over it almost immediately, but we had a couple of balance changes and suddenly everyone's trying all kinds of greed on ladder. So yeah, I think just a little bit of attention to the worst defenders in Wild goes a lot longer of a way than reversing Renathal. As for will combo decks rise to counter control / Reno decks, Druid and Shaman already exist. So like, the greedier the meta gets, the more we're going to see Infinite Shutterwalk kind of punish people for that, which is why getting rid of the Flurgle Tox combo would be such a boon for the format, because then aggro could actually punish that deck instead of getting farmed by it. And Borgie says, do you take any medicine for your throat after the stream where you laughed a lot? And will there be a laughing compilation one day? Well, that is a very funny question. I'm glad you're enjoying the laughing, and a laughing compilation actually sounds like kind of a fun idea. Nick Hargreaves asks, which cards, when released, do you think impacted the game more than they should have? Easily MartianBuu. I think MartianBuu not only made the game extremely stale in standard, but it made the game extremely stale overall. At that time, what kept me going with Hearthstone as my main game was the fact that I was having a completely different experience in standard and in Wild. So I was playing to Legend in standard, and then I would try to get Legend in Wild. It took longer back then, or vice versa. And I couldn't get bored of the game because I was constantly having a different experience. But with MartianBuu, it made it so that the game in both formats felt like it was defined by especially Baku. I was no longer having a different experience within my format or between the formats. So I actually dropped off pretty hard in Year of the Dragon just because of how much enthusiasm I lost with MartianBuu. And you can tell that they had too much of an impact because they're the only cards that have ever been rotated early. So yeah, I think that's pretty easy. Sonic asks, what advice could you give us to get better at card games, and why is the sweetest human not even from Earth? Oh, I see what you did there. I will tell you though, the sweetest human actually is from Earth. That would be my wife, Renee. As far as how can you get better at card games, I would say constant feedback and perspective. Perspective is important because a lot of the time something random will happen or something abnormal will happen in a single game. That is going to happen. You are going to just get screwed by something that is completely out of your control that you couldn't prepare for. And when that happens one time, you just can't let it get to you. For me, I'm much more likely to have a session of Hearthstone upset me than a single game. If I've had 5 good games and something goes wrong on the 6th one, I'm not going to be upset about that. I just had 5 good games. But I was not always, and people generally are not always like that. You know, like something will happen on that one game. They're attached to winning this game. And so when something bad happens in that game, they get upset. And then they're playing frustrated in the future, which makes them play worse. They miss more things. So yeah, basically try not to let the little things get to you. If something abnormal happens, try to laugh it off because it's funny. You're not playing the game to win every single game. You're playing the game to win a large collection of games. So if your goal is to be better at Hearthstone or card games, think about how can I win the most games, not how can I win every single game that I play. Sharks with laser beams. If you could only play one class for the rest of Hearthstone, which would you pick? Well, if you asked me in the first couple years, I would have said Warlock. If you asked me in the next couple years, I would have said Warrior. If you asked me a couple years ago, I would have said Shaman. And if you asked me this year, I would say Druid. So if you lock me in one class, I'm probably not going to be happy. But if I had to pick one, I'd probably guess Warlock. I really want to pick Death Knight because Death Knight is my favorite class from World of Warcraft, but the rune system isn't what I thought it was going to be when it came out. So I was expecting to get to toy with various rune combinations and have an interesting deck building puzzle. But what was released was Frost, Blood, and Unholy separately. So that's very top down. There's no deck building interest. It's just kind of like, well, here's some decks. But so I want to like Death Knight. I don't yet. And maybe that'll change in a year. If I was a risk-taking optimist, which I guess I am, I might pick Death Knight. Caleb asks, if you could design any one card to ship directly into Wild and Wild alone, what would it do? So in the Barons, I had one I specifically wanted, which was a 2-mana 2/3 battle cry. Your opponent can't draw more than one card next turn. That would give people an easy, cheap tech to deal with Celestial Alignment and APM Mage, which were causing me bad feelings at the time. But I don't think that's a problem as much today, especially considering we just nerfed a bunch of the combo decks, which is the preferred solution anyway. But today, I think kind of in line with my answer to the last question is a Death Knight hero card. Probably part of the reason why I'm not enjoying Death Knight is every other class has an exciting hero card or multiple exciting hero cards. And I would like to have one for Death Knight too. It's just missing that like late game transformative experience that I've come to really enjoy. I'll probably get more into the type of thing I'd like when I get around to making that video of what I would like from a wild exclusive set. Sean asks, why are you so amazing at everything? Aww. Tay asks, do you have plans to stream / make videos of other games? I do. So Marvel Snap soon. I pitched that as an idea in the video at the beginning of the week and people seem mostly receptive to it. So I'll try to have one next week after ladder resets in Snap and we'll see how that goes and go from there. My ideal end game for content creation is to be able to play whatever I want and have people still watch me. And so I was thinking about eventually getting into some platformers and just release them as one of videos. Like I haven't played Hollow Knight before. Maybe it'll be fun to watch me play that. But I think what's nice about platformers as opposed to card games is even if you haven't played them before, you can kind of get a sense of what's going on. Like a person moving around on the various platforms is a lot easier to tell the gist of what's going on than having to learn a whole new card game in order to even understand what's going on in the video. So I'll look into maybe doing that sooner rather than later. I don't know. Cornboy says, favorite card art? I gotta give it to Raza, Mal'Ganis, or Cthulhu the Shattered. Favorite deck of all time? Well, I actually did a video on that a couple days ago, which hopefully I will remember to link at the top right of the screen. In failing that, it really was from a couple days ago. It was top 10 Hearthstone decks of all time. You can go find it and watch it to find out what my favorite deck of all time was. Tay asks, do you like Pokemon games? What is your favorite? I love Pokemon games. They are the games that got me into playing video games. I have played almost all of them as far as the main franchise is concerned. What is my favorite? I have recently started to look back at my Pokemon experience, and I gotta say Gen 3 is probably my favorite as far as when did I have the highest quantity of fun. I think that's partly because of the age I was at, but also the world in that one was so expansive. I know that a lot of people give the water half of Ruby Sapphire a hard time, but I actually really liked it. I think the problem with the water half of the game was the same problem that most of the Pokemon games have had, which is random encounters. Pokemon games have been experimenting with getting rid of that ever since Let's Go, and it's always been better. Like the random encounters is just fun sucking. I've tried to actually go back and play Brilliant Diamond after having played all the way through Scarlet Violet, and I can't finish it. I hate random encounters. They're just not any fun. So anyways, if you're on the water and you're not encountering a Tentacruel every other step, I think that it gets a lot better. I liked how much there was to explore in Generation 3, and I liked that the terrain was so different. And I thought Emerald was an amazing sequel because it lets you play versus Aqua and Magma instead of the choice that you had in Sapphire and Ruby. And then you got the extra base to accommodate both villain teams being active, and you got the extra focus on Rayquaza while getting to catch both of the box art Pokemon. So like that, like Emerald was a really good sequel. And of the more recent games, apart from the most recent two, Omega Ruby, Alpha Sapphire was a huge standout for me because of all those same things. So like, I want to say Gold Silver, but really if I stop and think about it, every time they've done a Gen 3 game, I think it's been a home run, and there's a lot to uniquely like about that gen. I will say though, Arceus is a much better experience in most ways than all other games. Arceus is the one that lets you have a ton of freedom on how to catch Pokemon, how to navigate the terrain. I think that they could scale back the gliding, make that less important, or at least not give it to me right away. Like as soon as you could glide over terrain, it really took a lot out of the game, I think. But also the combat system was really stupid. The combat system is not what I liked about the game. So give us the old combat system back, take the gliding away or limit it in some way, and remove every single speck of dialogue from the entire game. When you actually get to start playing Arceus, there's just so much fun exploration to do. Being able to freely move around the terrain in different ways, gather various resources that aren't Pokemon, but catch Pokemon in a bunch of different ways, like getting to sit in the bush and like trick them into facing away from you and catching them from behind without having to battle. Like all that stuff was so fun. And I would like them to like make that more mainstream and up all of the good qualities of that. So Arceus / Emerald would be my flat answer. What type of deck is your favorite? I'm assuming that this is asking about archetype style and not specific deck. So between aggro, mid-range, control, combo type of stuff. Boring answer is I don't have one. I really like all types of decks variety is more important to me than anything specific. But if I had to pick one, I would say control combo. So I like decks that play reactively, see a lot of their deck, and then have funny OTKs or infinite locks and stuff like that. So Shutterwalk Shaman and Druid of last year, prime examples of that type of thing. I was editing the top 10 favorite decks and got through the Shaman section, and I was like, wait, how did I talk about Shaman and never address Bolner Shaman? So there was Bolner Yasha from Dark Moon Fair Shaman in Standard, and that's like the epitome of that type of deck for me. It had a super late game OTK combo, which is right when I want it. But the deck didn't rely specifically on that combo. You didn't have to do that. You could use the combo pieces flexibly and win in different ways. So those type of decks, I think, are the most fun for me. Timeless asks, how do you like your grilled cheese? Well, I like it grilled. As far as like, do I want to put like ham or something in it? As soon as you start adding things that aren't just bread and cheese, then it becomes a melt. And I love melts. I could go for a melt all the time. But grilled cheese is just bread and cheese to me. As far as bread, sourdough. Cheese, I think you can't go wrong. I'm used to cheddar, but pepper jack is good. And mozzarella is probably good too. Christian asks, when will they unnerf Mindrunner Lucia? It's my favorite card of all time, and it wouldn't even be that broken in Wild. Well, if it's never, it'll be too soon. Contrasting with your opinion there, it is actually my least favorite card of all time. If I separate myself from my biases, it can't be unnerved because they have Aggro Priest now. With Aggro Priest, the reason that the text was changed, it is a 3 mana time warp for an aggro deck, and that is just too much. You can't unnerf it. Separately, it was an obnoxious control tool. It is by far the most egregious of any Dirty Rat style card in the game. You just get to like go into your opponent's hand and pick and choose multiple things. You should be able to play against a deck expecting to have your hand. Disruption should exist to some degree, but Mindrunner Lucia is far, far, far past the line. I know what it's like to have your favorite card nerfed. That for me was Raza. It's not my favorite card presently, but it was at the time of its nerfing, and I was very bitter about that for a while. So I do feel you. I have empathy for you, but Lucia, no, that shouldn't be unnerfed. CIBC asks, pineapple on pizza, potato jam, violence against mangoes, snakes equals danger noodles? I need to know your opinion. I think a lot of people who are disgusted by the idea of pineapple on pizza have just had bad pineapple on pizza, and bad pineapple on pizza is pretty common. Whenever you get like those little tiny slivers of pineapple and it's hard, that's bad pineapple on pizza. That's kind of gross. I don't, or if I go to a pizza place and I have that type, I'm never ordering pineapple from them again. The larger slices of pineapple that end up being a little squishy, that are like 1/8 of the ring, that's really good. And people talk about like, oh, there shouldn't be any fruit on my pizza. Listen, there's fruit all over your pizza. It's integral. The tomatoes are fruit and they are all up in your pizza. So you can't tell me that fruit doesn't go on pizza. It is an integral part of pizza. So when pineapple is done well, it's actually really good. And I don't understand why people are such haters. I think part of it is because pizza is meant to be shared and pineapple is a polarizing ingredient. So if anybody likes pineapple, you might have to have pineapple on your own pizza. So that's more of a fundamental issue with pizza than it is a problem with pineapple as a topping itself. But yeah, I think it can be done right and it can be done wrong, like most things. Potato jam, I don't know what that is. Is that mashed potatoes? I like mashed potatoes. Violence against mangoes, I don't know what that is. I think it's okay to cut up some mangoes and eat them. I would do it myself. Snakes are danger noodles. That's true. Patrick asks, favorite fruit and why is it watermelon? My favorite fruit is watermelon because Renee's favorite fruit is watermelon and Renee is my favorite. My actual favorite fruit is probably apple. I like apples on their own with peanut butter in a pie. Pretty good, but also maybe mangoes. I have mangoes in yogurt every day and that's very tasty. Finally, we have INX asks, what's 2 + 2? How dare you ask a Hearthstone player to do math? You know that we can't do it. I hope that you're happy with yourself. All right, so that wraps things up. I hope you guys enjoyed the AMA, and thank you for coming along with me on this journey of non-gameplay style videos this week. If you like these types of videos, let me know in the comments. I am very open to doing more of them in the future. If you were missing the gameplay, I will have gameplay next week. Mostly Hearthstone, but I'm going to try to fit a snap video in there either this week or the week after. Remember to like and subscribe to support the channel. I hope you enjoyed, and thank you so much for watching.